You're ready. Leanne, are we on?
Recording in progress.
Oh, yep. I'd say we're on.
We're on.
Hello, everyone. My name is Angie Morthland. I am Vice President of the MAHS. Today, I'm kind of excited to talk a little bit about our speakers today. We're going to learn about the Dixie Saloon. I also want to remind you that we have Christmas in the Village December 7th as well. So if you need more information about that, check out our webpage and our Facebook page. And if you're not able, obviously someone you know isn't able to attend, we are recording this. Roy's recording it, and it's also on, no pressure at all. Right?
No pressure.
Also on our channel, our Zoom channel as well. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome everybody to our first historian about the Dixie Saloon.
All right.
Brand new spanking.
All right.
Thanks, Brendan.
Hi, thank you everybody for coming. My name is Brendan Koshishek, and I am the current general manager of the Dixie Saloon. I don't know, I think it was about 6 weeks ago, the owner of the property approached me if I would be willing to make this presentation on the history of the Dixie Saloon, and I jumped at the opportunity, and then a few weeks later into it, I thought, oh my gosh, I am absolutely not the right person to do this, because there are so many people in this community that have such lengthy and deep ties to this piece of property, and it ties the community together in so many different ways that I didn't even realize it until I started delving into the history of this building and what it's been to this community for 140 years. And as I started learning more about it, I couldn't stop. And so many people in the community were so helpful to try and not only provide me with the information for this presentation, but also to work together in some gray areas to try to fill in some holes. So before we start, I do want to thank a few people for their help. The first person who is not here is Bob Thompson. Bob was a police officer in Mackinaw City for many years. I think everybody here probably knows him. He also works as a late-night security guard at the Dixie Saloon. So Bob and I have had many chats about things that happen in that building. And Bob has been always a great resource. And when I really needed somebody to talk to, Bob really helped me put some people together and, you know, suggested also among others that I also want to thank Roy. Right, when you walked into that Dixie that day with the pictures and were willing to give me the time to do that, that was really beautiful. Thank you very much for that. And Aaron Thompson, aka Lamb Chop, thank you for the time out of your Lions game last night. You really helped me, you know, put one specific piece I was missing together. So really, thank you very much for that. And so welcome to the history of the Dixie Saloon. We were talking earlier, and this could be a 12-hour presentation and take 10 years of research. I believe there's so much history in this block of space in Mackinaw City. But we're going to try and touch on basically the history and evolution of that building, what it was, what it meant to the community, how it was tied to the infamous Dixie Highway, and then we're going to talk about some of the happenings there. And then we're going to give the family that owns it now an opportunity to speak about their history and how they came to own it and what it has become since their purchase of that property. Okay. So without further ado, I think the first thing we're going to talk about are some things that we absolutely know about the Dixie Saloon. And the first thing that really I was in awe of is this building was identified on a Mackinaw Village plot map dating back to 1884. Okay, and in that plot map, we're going to talk about what it was on that plot map down the road. But, and you know, ever since this period, that building, that space, what is now the Dixie Saloon, what it has evolved into, has been a deeply rooted part of the Mackinaw City, Mackinaw Village history for 140 years. Since 1884, we were absolutely able to identify 8 different businesses providing goods and services in this building location. So 8 different businesses we've been able to identify since the year 1884. And really the history shows that some part of this building has been in existence for 140 years. I think that's pretty incredible. There was a murder at the Dixie. So we're going to take some time and we're going to talk about that. And today, really, the Dixie stands as one of the highest volume and most recognized family dining, brewery, and entertainment experiences, not only in northern Michigan, but in the upper Midwest. So what started 140 years ago on a plot map now is really an attraction for the area. So the first thing we want to look at, and Roy was really helping in identifying this, and this just really places a lot of things, is this is a city plot map from 1884. And if you see right here, this is the space that occupies where the Dixie Saloon is now. And with you know, a magnifying glass, you'll see that this side says drugs and this side says vacants. So basically the Dixie Saloon was selling drugs in 1884. And that is in block 75. And what we're talking about this, I really want to point out, because coming up it's very important to the history and the beginnings of the Dixie Saloon, is at this point your Mercer House was located back here in block number 74. Okay? And I think that one of the things that I kept hearing from everybody was that it was once the Mercer House. But at first glance and looking at this plot map and all of the pictures and information documented that we had at the time really didn't prove that. So that's where becoming an elementary historian started to become fun, because so many people were convinced it was, that we really had to dig to not just be able to say it was once a Mercer House. So here's what we know about the Mercer House being in this location. Is obviously from the previous slide, the Mercer House was identified as being in block 74 in 1884. So we know that this existed in 1884, or at least it was being constructed at that point, right? Because it was identified on the village plot map. We know that it was owned and operated by Mrs. W.C. Mercer. We know that the Mercer House did burn down. From all of the people that I talked to, some of the information said that it happened in 1891, and other information indicated that it happened on February 27th, 1892. At this point, I'll just have to leave it with that's the information that I've received from multiple people, and I really haven't been able to draw a very specific conclusion there. But we did know that the Mercer House did burn down. Okay. In the book Savage Straits by Edna Kaufman, there was an excerpt from September of 1893, which identifying Mrs. Mercer going to Sheboygan to buy furniture for the Mercer House, while she were furnished cakes, pies on short order. So that means that in 1893, definitely after the Mercer House burnt, she was opening the Mercer House. Okay. We have an advertisement, which is right here in the Mackinaw Witness, and that is from November 11th, 1893, 131 years ago today specifically, which I think is very cool. And what it says is Mercer House on Central Avenue near the East End, which would absolutely be the location where the Dixie is right now. I think that's a perfect description of where the Dixie is. And board, $1 a week, transients, 25 cents a meal, good bakery. So I think that this is where the Mercer House starts after the fire in 1893. From everything I've learned, everything seems to point right there. All right, so we've matured from a drugstore now to a hotel and some type of food service, okay, in 1893. And then we know from article on Savage Straits More print that on April 2nd, 1899, Mrs. Mercer furnishes a farewell Easter dinner, and the Mercer House closes in 1899. So basically, we place the Mercer House in the location of the Dixie Saloon from 1893 to 1899. This picture, and it's the only picture I think we have of the Beach Hotel, absolutely the same building, and this you can see by the writing here. The building now becomes our second business, which is the third business really, which is the Beach Hotel. We have a drugstore, we have Mercer House, now we have the Beach Hotel. We think that this is right around 1900. Okay, pretty much following the Mercer House, or perhaps somebody purchased it from Mrs. Mercer. I wasn't able to find any transactions or details, but that's sort of what we speculate happened here. Now we move on, and we think this is 1917. The Dixie Highway was being built between 1915 and 1929. And basically, we all know the story of the Dixie Highway, right? It runs all the way from Florida, stopped right in front of our building, and it really marked the end of the Dixie Highway. But the thing to note here is at this point now, 17 years later, this building is now Hotel Wahwatan, okay? So we think that in somewhere between 1900, 1917, this business changed hands again to be the Hotel Wahwatan. And if you look in the background, you'll see the Windermere back here, and that literally right now is in the space that the house from Shepler's Ferry is at. Okay, it's just that perfect angle. And this would be the dedication ceremony to the monument. So Carl Fisher convinced the Mackinaw City to put the monument up there, marking the end of the Dixie Highway. And the really neat thing about this is that every stone was brought by a local villager or farmer. Okay, so they didn't just hire somebody to put it up. The community built it. So it was a community piece. And the interesting thing here is that now we see the building change again. So now the building becomes Dixie Inn and Restaurant. So we figure that this is about 1930s, and this is the first time that this space in Mackinaw City, which has been providing goods and services since at least 1884, this is the first time that it has the name Dixie on the door, okay? And we obviously speculate that that obviously is for obvious reasons. The monument drew attention to the end of the Dixie Highway. It became a more popular thoroughfare for travelers and tourists. And so appropriately, they wrote on the tails of the Dixie Highway, right? Smart. So some other people might be able to interject here, but everything points to it becoming the Dixie Tavern around 1940-ish. And it remained the Dixie Tavern until the mid-1980s. So really right now you have this situation where you have the Dixie Tavern providing drinks, food, dancing, live music pretty strongly for a period of 40 years. Okay, so this was an incredible business for the Mackinaw City area in northern Michigan. So the monument itself survived until the year 1954. And from talking to Roy, I learned that the stones, it basically fell apart, and the stones were placed on the coast of Lake Huron, on the water edge of Lake Huron. Some of them are probably still there, truly. And then one of the things when we were in the office and we were looking at all of these pictures, one of the things that Enzo actually notices was, oh my gosh, the building is brick now. So if we go back to some of these older pictures, none of these pictures was the building brick. But we get to the time of the Dixie Tavern, and we clearly see now we have a brick building or some kind of brick outer structure. So at this point, basically, something changed in the structure of the building. And I think this picture is somewhere around 1950-ish. And of all the photos I have, this is the first color photo we have of the Dixie Tavern. We took, I included at least one photo of the inside. This is what it looked like when you walked into the Dixie Tavern, even I think up until the 70s and 80s. And it really became famous. It's in quite a bit of literature, not just the literature that we have about the folklore here of Mackinaw City, but the Dixie Tavern became a pretty famous place at the end of the Dixie Highway. And then one of the things I noticed, some things I didn't really include in here, was just the spirit of the Dixie. You know, there's something so special about it. And really, even going back to the Dixie Tavern and the multiple people and owners that the Dixie Tavern had, they all seemed to have this spirit of fun, creativity, creative marketing, and putting together alcohol, live music, and really good food. So that is very much a common thread from all of the owners that had the Dixie Tavern, and is certainly prevalent in today's owners. Just really creative people that wanted to be part of the community, and they use this establishment to bring people to Mackinaw City and really help them feel at home while they were here. Anybody like true crime? So early on in taking the management position, one night talking to Bob Thompson, he describes this murder scenario. And gosh, we must have talked about it for about 40 or 45 minutes. And I completely forgot about it until I talked to Roy. And the really neat thing is Bob Thompson was there and Roy was working as a bartender. So I have these two people that were actually part of this. Okay, so we had Roy Cole, who was a bartender at the time. He was looking outside the window on the east side of the building and saw at least a second set of shots fired. And then our own beloved Bob Thompson literally provided first responder services to Cheryl View right on the handicapped entrance, right inside that door. Her body was brought right inside that door, and we're going to learn a little bit more here in a minute about what actually happened at the Dixie Tavern. So I was able to find an excerpt from an appellate court in 1984 releasing their appeal decision. And I included it because it really gave a great description of what actually happened, which matches 100% to everything that both Bob and Roy were able to provide for information, which is really beautiful when everything matches up. So we have three people in this murder. We have a guy named Gary Williams, we have Cheryl View, and we have Robert View. Cheryl and Robert View at the time are lawfully married, however, also lawfully separated. Cheryl View is now living with Gary Williams. So the second day of employment at the Dixie Tavern, Cheryl was a waitress there. Her Robert View comes in several times harassing her, and then he makes threats to her. And then when she gets off work, she walks outside and her tires are flat, and the spare tire in her trunk is flat. And he's there offering to give her a ride home, which she refuses. And she calls her boyfriend, Gary Williams, who then decides to come. And Robert View leaves in a bunch of anger, swearing that he's going to kill him and all kinds of things, which was witnessed by several people. So Gary Williams arrives, he evaluates the car, and he starts working. He brought tires and he starts working on the car. Cheryl View then goes outside the side door, which is now the handicapped entrance at the Dixie, to help him. And another car pulls up and the window goes down and shots start to be fired. This is when Roy goes to the window and witnesses another set of shots being fired and Cheryl View trying to jump in Gary Williams' car as the shots are being fired. Then emergency services were called. That's when Bob Thompson showed up on the scene. They brought Cheryl View into the Dixie. She was bleeding profusely. She ended up being grazed in the top side of her neck. She had a shot in her hip, and she had a shot that was the most severe of the wounds was in the back of her arm. So she had been at least pierced 3 times in the shooting. So Robert View is put to trial, and Cheryl View is obviously a witness, and he's convicted of first-degree murder and gets sent to prison. Sometime later, his appeal was granted, and he was appealing on the grounds that because Cheryl View was technically and lawfully still married, that their divorce had not happened yet, that she could not testify against him. And the appellate court, there's a clause in that law which basically says that if your spouse is testifying against you because you intended harm towards the other spouse or towards the shared children, then the testimony of a spouse will be allowed. So they overturned his appeal. The sentence stuck, and Robert View is currently in the Michigan DOC system serving a life sentence. So I thought that was a really interesting part of history at the Dixie Tavern. And it became especially interesting because I personally know people who are involved in it that day now. So I just, everybody loves a good true crime story, but it's very sad. And a lot of the relatives of these people are still relevant in our community today. About this tragic incident that happened at the Dixie Tavern in 1980. Well then, in 1984, it takes a whole new look, doesn't it? The Dixie Tavern in this long history now becomes a McDonald's. One of the things I started doing, or kind of a part-time gig that Enzo and I shared for a couple years and fought over because we both wanted to do it so much, was driving the trolley and giving the historic trolley tour of Mackinaw City. And one of the big excerpts in that, when we would drive by and talk about the Dixie Saloon, was the fact that it was a McDonald's. And not only that it was a McDonald's, that it was known, heard, thought, believed that it was actually the only one of two McDonald's that actually shut down because of seasons and was a seasonal McDonald's. I have to tell you that as much as I've heard that, I was absolutely unable to verify it in any way. I looked through McDonald's records. I spent probably 4 or 5 hours trying to find that, and I could not verify it. But so I honestly don't know if that is true or not, in all fairness and honesty, but I think we all believe it. So we're going to keep saying it on the trolley. So the McDonald's goes out in 1997. And for one summer, it was a pizza place. And that becomes our 7th business, providing goods and services to Mackinaw City since we know at least 1884 at this space and in this building. So I'm going to really kind of turn this over to Enzo for a little while because I think post-1999 there's actually some really good history there. But the building was purchased in 1999 by the Leggio family, and it was completely renovated, as we all know, into this beautiful 2-story restaurant, bar, and entertainment establishment. And the building is now known as the world-famous Dixie Saloon Brewery. I added the world-famous part when I got there in 21 because I deeply, a lot of the community made fun of me for a while for doing it, but I deeply believe that it is a world-famous establishment. And when people ask me online or in the building what makes it world famous, the answer is very easy. Because not only do we see thousands and thousands and thousands of customers every season from different countries that come, and when they come to Mackinaw City, they have to stop at the Dixie Saloon. That's only part of it. So many people around the world contact us and want to work at the Dixie Saloon from so many countries. I can tell you that just in the 2024 season, I had employees from 12 different countries working in the building. So world famous means acknowledged by both individuals, consumers, and employees. But to me, it also means that the Dixie Saloon has become a cultural mecca. It's become a mecca of culture from several different countries and culture of 140 years, all come together at this beautiful establishment. And this year we had days that we saw over 3,000 people a day. And at peak season this year we had 111 employees in the building. So that tells you what this building is doing for providing income for people in the Sheboygan County area and helping visa workers that we have send money home to their families every year so that we can have a great tourist season every single year. So I will be back in a minute and talk about what we've done since 2021, but Enzo's going to take over here for a minute and talk about the history of his family and how they came to own the Dixie Saloon and how they built it.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming tonight. Enzo Leggio, I'm sure you probably know who I am, like it or not. just to give you a synopsis, it was my great-grandparents that came to Mackinaw first in the 50s. They came with my great-uncle. They built the first motel in Mackinaw City, which was called the North Star. Currently, it's a portion of the waterfront inn, so it doesn't look the same, but it's the same buildings, actually, and hopefully someday soon they'll change. As children, obviously, we grew up in the motel business, taking care of every aspect of it, plunging toilets in the middle of the night, or stripping beds in the morning, scrubbing tiles, sweeping the parking lot, whatever it was, even at this age. So that's Joe and I over there on one of the roofs, and this is actually what we were referred to as the L shape at the Clarion. Clarion was our first hotel that we had. This is when we were adding the second floor of that building. I still remember this. Ironically, I remember it quite vividly because I was running along that roof and thinking to myself, you know, my grandfather kept yelling at me, "You're going to fall off the roof, you're going to fall off the roof." I didn't fall off the roof, but he kept yelling at me, and it's probably one of the only times my grandfather ever did yell at me. But either way, we added the second story of that building at that time, and with my grandfather, it was kind of cool. And this would be my grandfather right here, and my grandmother, and this is my brother. This photograph is in the 70s. This is actually in the 60s. This one here is, well, if you look at the snow on that second floor, still not there. So this would have been the 60s. When my parents and my grandparents first came here, they didn't really have a lot of money at all. They had, my grandmother used to make pizzas in a pizza place in Detroit. My grandfather used to put in sewers. He was a mason, and my dad used to work at a grocery store in the morning, go to school, college, and then he worked as a pin setter at a bowling alley at night. They pooled their money together, and they followed my grandmother's parents and her brother to Mackinaw City. The first motel they bought was the Travelers Motel. This was this is not the original sign. This is the second sign that actually existed. My parents had already changed the sign once. So they purchased that motel, very, very small, one single building, and then every year they would reinvest in the business and they would add on. They added the lakefront building, they added the court side. On the other side, they added that L-shaped portion. So it was always something new every single year. This is us. This is, that was me as a little kid. If you notice the hair, still looks like me. But my mother, my brother, this was the office at the time at the Travelers, the pool building. So when my father first came here, they didn't have a pool building. They didn't have a pool. Some other people that were in town that were actually my grandmother's other brothers built some other hotels in Mackinaw City. So at that time, her one brother built the North Star. My grandparents and my parents built the Travelers, or added on to the Travelers. Her sister built which is now the Super 8 Beachfront, used to be called the Prince, and the Queens. The Queens is actually where the parking lot was for the Hamilton. It was Queens, Prince, and her other brother built the Parkside, which is also still there and still owned by his son, Tony Nardoni, right now. So our family came here, built hotels. They all, you know, came with great ambition, and some stayed, some didn't, but they built a pool, and that was kind of like a thing. One place had a pool. They did really well. My father, the next year, and my grandparents reinvested and built a pool, and that was the opening of the pool, and I guess everybody had to take pictures there. I wasn't born yet at the time, so that was again in the 60s, and this was obviously going to be in the 70s because I was born in the 70s. This was the same day actually on that roof, just so you know, kind of mixed up. That was 1974. My father bought his, it was a Thunderbird, Ford Thunderbird, rusted out in about 6 months. But anyways, picture behind it is the Surf Motel. That is now the Blue Water Motel, right next door. That's the old sign. This is our living quarters where we used to live, was right inside here, and that was the office right there. There was no second story. Later on, my parents added a second story, just because they had 2 kids, my grandparents, and they added some bedrooms up there. That is actually my grandmother right here. That's my mom, and those are some steady customers that came, gosh, probably for like 30-some years, because I still remember them when I was a kid, and even later on, they used to bring presents and everything every year. It was really neat. So anyways, that was our first motel, expanded from there. In the year, we purchased it from McDonald's. McDonald's did confirm to us, they told us, the gentleman who sold it to us, it was the only seasonal McDonald's, and it didn't work. they made most of their money through drive-throughs, and there's nowhere to put a drive-through, so they left that spot, and they planned on building over where the marathon is and adding on to that. And then that never got approved, never went to through fruition, I guess. Then we took it over, we leased it out for 1 year while we were doing plans and everything else, and then we redeveloped it into the Dixie Saloon that it is today. Due to zoning and everything, we maintained the outer perimeter walls. Now, which is kind of neat because those walls are the original walls that have been there for however long. If they were ever taken apart or whatever, I don't know, but they're very old. Even the floor system in the Dixie, if you go in there, it's kind of all over the place. That floor system is the original floor system underneath. We redecked it where the pillars are. You'll see the columns, the logs that come out. Those we actually cut holes in the floor and we put in foundation, and then we kind of filled in around them. But you'll notice these are original walls that you see here going around, and they actually go around all sides. That's just more here, putting the roof on. The Dixie, that's, we don't have one on the other side, right?
No. That's
okay, my apologies. But anyways, on the other side, all the way down the other side, so it'll be this side here. Those are actually all the original walls also. Some of the windows in there were the original windows that we left, that were these up top, and we even left some of those right there. Those still exist today as the original windows from when McDonald's was there, and I don't know how far before that. I'm assuming the Dixie had those also. But we did this, opened it. We wanted to bring that history back, and the Dixie was kind of iconic in Mackinaw. I mean, even renting rooms, customers, something we always heard was the Dixie. Everybody always talked about it. So bringing it back, we thought this is a great community place that everybody has loved for a century, and it was definitely something we wanted to return back to Mackinaw City. And we did our best effort to do so. When we originally brought it back that first season, you'll notice it's knotty pine throughout the entire thing. There was one booth, which was in this corner. It's this corner booth on the second floor. Opened it up, and in that booth, you know, when we opened, somebody started graffiti in the Dixie. They started writing on the booth, and they wrote on the wall. And then we go up there and we'd sand it, and I think we replaced those boards, I don't even know, maybe a dozen times, half a dozen times. Sanded the table, and every time we sanded the table, there's a spot sanded in the table. It's the middle of summer. Well, for some reason, that booth became the place where it was kind of hidden, that everybody decided to write on it. And it was almost like a cancer for it. And it grew throughout the Dixie Saloon. Right from that spot, there was no stopping it. And we kind of just accepted it. Now, you're probably, I'm sure Brendan will probably touch on it because it's turned into something that the Dixie is. Everybody returns for it. People write their names on the walls. People put their dates on the walls. And people always return to add to it. And it's actually become a really neat thing about the Dixie, and now it's something that we've embraced and appreciate that it's there. Another thing too, maybe I should have said this before, but when we actually took apart the old, I'm going to go back so you see the picture. Go to the McDonald's. When we took this roof off and we opened up that area inside there was almost like a time capsule. We found so many things inside there in the rooms that was, somebody just boarded up the windows and just left it all in there. A lot of that stuff is hanging inside the Dixie Saloon. If you walk around, you'll see all the stuff hanging on the walls. That came from up there. Even woodworking tools, a bunch of weird things. Some things that has been a topic of conversation, which you'll probably bring up, and I'm sorry if you have that in here. I don't know if you do or not. But it's just a lot of different things that are kind of neat, and again, it was history of the Dixie, and we put it back inside the Dixie and left it there. I'm going to turn you back over to Brendan and have him finish this up with you guys. Thank you, guys.
Well, thank you. And really from here on, it's pretty short. I took over the Dixie in the very, 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 very beginning of 21 as we were just coming out of COVID. And we all know that the world has dramatically changed since COVID. I took it over at the beginning of it actually being able to really highlight the brewery. And if you look back at this picture now, all of this in here upstairs on the second floor, which used to be a conference room called the Buffalo Room. That's our brewery. And the first beer that was ever made in that brewery was Mackinaw Island IPA. And during the summer this year, that beer actually, through a lot of help and assistance with a partner, actually came out in a very designer can highlighting the Mackinaw Bridge, the Northern Lights, the Dixie Saloon, and we put our first beer into retail. And I think that's just one way that we're working consistently to maturate this product and to put it downstate. And from my understanding, the beer sold very well this summer throughout Petoskey and in Mackinaw City. And shortly after that, the brewery came out with a Pilsner and a light Pilsner, which for those non-beer drinkers in the crowd, those are beers that will compete with your mainline beers like Budweiser, Miller, Coors, things like that. And we really struggled with naming that beer. And when I really thought about it, the only name that it could possibly have was graffiti. Because that is a staple thing when you work in the Dixie Saloon. The office gets mad at me because I keep going for, black markers. Because everybody that comes in the building has to put their name on it and has to be a part of the history. So not only do you have this 140-year-old piece of history, now everybody that comes inside of it wants to be part of that history. And I think that's why we started to embrace it, really, is because it was people coming from all over the world and making their mark on this really incredibly historic piece of property and everything that it had become. And last year, I was part of a couple that sat in the same booth. The first year I worked there, the second year I worked there, the third year I worked there. And they left a mark as a couple in that booth for 3 years. And on the fourth year, they came back and he made a marriage proposal in that booth. So, and that happens all the time. Those romantic stories and history and I remember when, and it's so many people tell me I would never have your job. But really it's a hard job. It really is. But it's also really rewarding, and I'm really grateful and thankful to the Legio family for entrusting me with this 140-year-old icon. They literally trust me with this building. It's a big deal. And I feel responsible for taking care of the building and for every customer and employee that is ever in it. You know, it keeps me up at night, sometimes literally. But I never thought I would end up here in this being my home, let alone being an aspiring chef and a restaurant manager. But I love it. I love it. I wouldn't want to do anything else. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And I wouldn't want to be part of anything else in this community, this family, and the world famous Dixie Saloon. And I want everybody to know that watches the video and is here tonight that the people in that building work so hard. I cannot tell you how hard the people work in that building. They run up and carry 40-pound trays up flights of stairs for 12-hour shifts. They work without getting breaks. They come in through the snow on a minute's notice. And I can tell you, in the restaurant business, it's a hard business. And there's a lot of employee rotation and turnover. And I can tell you that aside from one person who retired this summer, we have not lost a kitchen staff in 3 years. The core of our kitchen staff has been there for 3 years. And I think that is a testament to the joy that can be found working in the Dixie Saloon. It's a family. And it's owned by a family, and it's a family inside, and we fight and we don't like each other. But then when something happens, everybody at the Dixie Saloon is there for each other. And it's a really beautiful thing, and it's more than just a building. The Dixie Saloon is a culture. It's a culture of food and fun and music, and it's just a great place to be, and it's a great corner in Mackinaw City. And as we move forward, I think my biggest hope for the Dixie is that it continues to be more and more and more part of the community, and not something that is segregated from the community, but an epicenter for Mackinaw City. I don't know if it's typical to have questions from anybody. I don't know if I can answer them. But I'm sure between Enzo and I, we probably can get through it. So thank you very, very much for this opportunity. I've really enjoyed it, and I really love being a part of this in Mackinaw City and the Dixie and the Legio family. It means a lot to me. Any questions?
Do you happen to? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Hi.
Who owned the McDonald's?
I think that's a tidbit that we missed. So not only was it the only seasonal McDonald's, it was one of the very, very few actual non-franchised corporate-owned McDonald's. So McDonald's Corporation, if I'm correct, actually owned the building and
McDonald's
the
Corporation.
business. Yeah. See, I didn't know the answer. Actually, surprise me.
I know I probably missed it. You said there was a murder in the Dixie. She survived?
Yes, she survived.
So there wasn't really a murder.
Yes, her boyfriend Gary Williams was dead DOA.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
We didn't
So-
mention that.
You didn't mention that.
Yeah, I was really confused.
I'm sorry.
Serious?
Yes. I knew that, so I sort of thought it was an assumption. I apologize for that. But yeah, he was found dead on the scene. She was bleeding profusely. She did live, and he did die. And he was tried solely on premeditated first-degree murder of Gary Williams.
He's still alive?
Robert View is actually in the Michigan prison system still today. Yes. Robert View. Any other questions? Yes.
I heard rumor there was a song lyric somehow that mentioned us at the Dixie. Is that true?
That is true.
Oh yeah, actually Bob Seger,
Oh.
Rolling Away. How many miles out of Mackinaw City?
I don't remember.
Yeah, Bob Seger, Rolling Away
12 hours out of
references
Mackinaw
Mackinaw
City.
City. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we did have Bob Seger frequent the Dixie at times. Ed Herman used to come there. I'm sure everybody knows Ed Herman when he lived here, but used to be quite often they would be in the Dixie.
Yeah, just a few weeks ago we had the whole Grand Trunk Railroad group in. Yeah. Yeah, it's really good. They were going up north. So yeah, we do see a lot. And I think the last one before that was Paul Krause, the ex-safety for the Minnesota Vikings, was in. That was great. We get a lot of kind of famous people strolling through.
Anybody watch Game of Thrones?
Uh-oh.
You know he was king of. He wasn't. He was the king beyond the wall. He was king before Jon Snow. He was Julius Caesar in Rome for HBO. He actually came there quite a few times.
Is that why that's your ringtone?
No, but I like to. This is when he was in Rome and afterwards. But yes, but thanks for bringing that up.
Well, and you know, one more thing, something that came out of this for me is I personally, this thought happened like somebody might be doing this 50 years ago, and I might be a historic figure at the Dixie. And I thought it would be really important to preserve what we do have as history for the future. So I'm really motivated and committed to putting this all together with more, and not only putting it on display at the Dixie Saloon, but also providing, you know, basically for whatever it costs to print it up, $1 or something, just a little pamphlet on the history of Dixie Saloon. So this really was good for me, and I really want to make sure that in my time there that I do everything I can to preserve the history of what this is for, you know, who knows how many more generations here in Mackinaw City.
Aaron, could you talk about the things you brought in?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, the coat there, that was my Uncle Larry's
Hold it
from
up for the kids.
late 70s, early 80s probably.
Back up a little bit.
Yeah, I inherited it when he passed away, when I got his tote full of junk. And all kinds of
This isn't
but
junk.
Uncle Larry like bartending in
That's
every
not
bar.
junk. And then we got some
Mackinaw.
actual coasters and
Yeah, then someone, Jerry Schmidt actually gave me the coasters and the glass because he worked with my dad, bartender there at the Dixie Saloon. He passed away in a car accident in 1978 with the owner of the Dixie Saloon, George Barnish. So Jerry Schmidt gave me those because he worked with my dad and was good friends with my dad. So those are probably, you know, from the 70s.
see, that's what I'm talking about. All this history, and you know, it explains a lot about today's culture and all the families and people and relatives that are all intertwined into all of the businesses in Mackinaw City, really. And, you know, Dixie's kind of the epicenter of that.
Do you guys have any plans putting maybe a museum in there?
Ironically, we were just talking about a museum, but I think that I'm not the person to ask for that. I fight every day for one thing: space. You know, really, that's my biggest enemy is space. With the amount of people that we see through, if we did, it would have to be off-site somewhere, I think.
Let's go back to when you come up north on 23 to go deer hunting in the Upper Peninsula. This is the end of 23, okay.
Yeah.
What impact or transition did you have to do when people weren't waiting for the ferries all the time to bypass the city and just get on the bridge and go up north?
Sir, what do you
Yeah,
call a deer
impact?
with no eyes?
Hmm?
What do you call a deer with no eyes, sir?
Blind.
I have no idea.
Oh.
Quite honestly, I that's a question I can't answer.
Well, you gotta realize
at that time it wasn't our current ownership. I didn't live in the community, but one thing that I did actually, and I commented on this, is, you know, things that weren't including were advertisements from the Dixie Tavern over a 10, 15, 20 year period of time. And I just thought when the Leggio family purchased it, they just continued and expanded on this creativity and marketing. I mean, from the animal, the
Gobidi.
Gobidi.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they were even selling like fictitious Gobidi licenses. So it may seem like I'm not answering your question, but what I can say is it seemed like all of the owners through the history of the Dixie Tavern and everything have been really creative and, you know, just really driven to fill the building. I think so. I don't have an answer to that, but I think we can look back through some of the marketing things and maybe look at some of that. But that's a good question. I mean, again, when I used to drive the trolley, one of the stops was in the State Marina, you know, and that big tall building is, we all know what that is, right? It's a car elevator. And the stories of, you know, the opening days of deer hunting season. Now, what do you think was the busiest day of the car ferry? It was on, you know, in the trolley. And it's the day before the opening day of deer hunting season. Pardon me. So, great question. I just don't know.
Another question. How many properties does your family own now? Do they own other motels and hotels?
We do own other hotels and motels in Mackinaw City. How
What
many
are they?
property? Mackinaw City. We're mainly based out of Mackinaw City. We own very few things downstate, but predominantly Mackinaw City. Born, raised, lived here my whole life. My brother also, my great-grandparents passed away here. I mean, this is where we've been. My grandparents, my parents, us, our children now, my brother's grandchild now, first grandchild. So many generations here at Mackinaw.
Someone online had a question about whether or not anyone remembers a family living upstairs at the Dixie in the 1960s, if that ever happened.
Does anybody have any recollection of that? I do not have any recollection of that.
Was anybody living upstairs in Dixie before?
I don't know of any of that either.
Okay, thank you.
No information that we know of,
And
but it's a good something to look at.
Yeah, and I was also wondering if you have things that you're looking forward to for this coming season. Do you have any new beers or amazing new food coming out
New
that
food.
you're excited about?
I can tell you that every year we try to do better. I know that sounds oversimplistic, but we try to improve the way we make food, what food we serve, how it's served, the people that are serving it, how you're treated from the moment that you walk in the door until the very second that you leave. Every day, even if sometimes it doesn't work out and it's a bad product for a consumer, we try very hard to be very good. And I can tell you that things that are coming in the future in the Dixie Saloon is just every year better food. Every year we learn how to make better food. And in the past 5 years, just how we handle meat and procure meat and handle meat and
I haven't had dinner yet.
Pardon?
I haven't had dinner yet.
Yeah, and cut our own meat and roast our own briskets and roast our own porks. And we just try to use the space we have more intelligently every year. And we do have some exciting things tied to the Dixie coming in the near future, hopefully this next summer, but we're not prepared to talk about those.
Stay tuned, right? Stay tuned.
That'll be in the next history.
Lesson.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're all getting older, but we all have tons of energy and love for the Dixie, and we have a lot of creative ideas that are going to start coming out here over the next few years with the Dixie. And for me as a manager, my goal is that the Dixie's an attraction. You know, it's something that people come to Mackinaw City, or if they're traveling up I-75 or down I-75, they have to stop in Mackinaw City because they have to see the Dixie Saloon. And that's what we want. And then beyond that, when they walk in the door, we want them to be happy. You know, we want them to give them a reason to take a vacation in Mackinaw City, or to come back, or to tell their kids about it so their kids can come up when they grow up. So we want to leave something for many, many years that's really special.
I want to say one thing. Brendan has worked for us for many years. He worked in a different capacity with us in the past. When he wanted the Dixie Saloon and you wanted to manage it, that was a no-brainer for us. We've had many people in the past manage, and they all did a great job, and they all had their strong points and their weaknesses, as everybody else in the world does. Brendan is the one person that I've known that's worked for us that if he has a weakness, he does everything he can to overcome that weakness. And he never lets up. It's constant. He is extremely driven, probably more driven than us at sometimes. It can be obnoxious. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's good. He's driven. He has. He's a good person. He'll tell you the way it is. He doesn't sugarcoat it either. Whether you're an employee or us, he tells us the way it is, and we're okay with that. He has become family. He literally. Same. He comes into us. If he yells at me, I don't care. It's like he's a brother. It's all good. And we learn from it, and we talk it through. And then at the end, whatever the outcome is, it's always something better. It's always an improvement. If he wants equipment, you know, and I don't care what it is, because he thinks it's going to make a better product, or it's going to be faster, and he can turn tables faster. Whatever his goal is, I know that he's thought it through. He's researched it. I'm well aware of it. And he implements it well, and then he proves himself every single time. So we as a family appreciate Brendan that he's come to us many years ago and helped us at so many aspects of our businesses. And then now at the Dixie Saloon, so very, very appreciative of Brendan. But as I said, he came to us as an employee, but he is now here as a family member. And that's how it'll be forever for us.
We gotta turn that off before I cry. Literally, it's a history lesson about the Dixie, but over the past few years, Mackinaw City has truly become my home. And it's just, I love being a part of this. I love being part of the Dixie. I love being part of the community. I love learning about the history, and I want to be part of it and preserve it for the people to come in the future. Thanks.
What city is at the other end of US 23? So this is one end.
You mean the Dixie Highway?
The Dixie Highway?
The Dixie Highway?
It's Miami, Florida.
Yeah.
I believe.
Goes to Miami?
Yeah.
Yeah. We were on vacation last November, and I actually took a picture. And what city were we in? I can't remember. But I calculated that it was 2 miles from the start point of the old Dixie Highway. We crossed the Dixie Highway, and there was a railroad sign up, and it said Dixie Highway. I took a picture of it and posted it on my Facebook account. I think with like 16.
It was Miami, Hollywood, or Hollandale.
Yeah, I can't remember, but we were just a little bit out of Miami Beach.
Well, that's where you need a sign that says, how many miles to the
Dixie Saloon? I agree. I agree. In fact, that
I'll
was
make
my
the sign if you want to put it up.
That was actually my Facebook post. I put the sign there and where we were at. And I think it was 1,671 miles to the Dixie Saloon. It was just irony. I was just sitting at a stoplight and I saw it. It's great.
Well, let's give them a round of applause. We want to thank you so much for coming. They'll be here available to chat with up here, and we'll see you December 7th at our chapel for Christmas in the Village. And there's a few things of snacks in the back, homemade cookies and some water, and some other items from the Historical Society. We thank you so much for coming. Thanks a bunch. Appreciate it. Ready for the next 50 years, right, guys? 50 more years. All right. Thank you.
We got to put those things together. Good job, man.
Yeah.
God is so good. Thank you guys for coming here.
Thanks. Great job. I really appreciate your help. You really helped me get through this thing. Down the stretch, too. I was very worried about it.